Remember the meeting from the overview video? I was expecting Trisha to draft an email. She was waiting for me to send her content, and John was the only one who remembered what we'd actually decided in our previous meetings. So there we were, with nothing accomplished, plodding through the same discussion all over again. When we write down our decisions and agreements in meetings, then publish these notes afterwards, that situation doesn't happen. That's why take visible notes is the 5th core competency we teach at Lucid Meetings. Visible notes are exactly what they sound like. Notes that everyone in the meeting can literally see as they're being created. Now, this is obviously more work than taking private notes for yourself, so what makes it worth the effort? Here's why. Visible notes create stronger team agreements. When you and everyone see that agreement in writing, there's no question about what was decided and who's supposed to do what. Clear up misunderstandings, bad assumptions, and ambiguity. When the group sees that what was written doesn't match what they were thinking, and they can speak up to clear up the confusion right there and then. They show progress. When everyone sees results captured at each step in the meeting, and they establish joint ownership for those results. When everyone has an opportunity to comment on, correct, and refine those notes together. They're no longer Sally's notes or Fred's notes. They're the team's notes. So those are our goals. We take visible notes to create strong agreements, clear up misunderstandings, show progress, and establish joint ownership for the results. Which helps us answer the question, what should we include when taking visible notes? The answer is, whatever you need to achieve those goals. Before we get into the specifics, I want you to really hold on to this understanding about why we take visible notes in the first place, because achieving those goals is far more important than sticking to any list of what you should or should not write down. With that said, let's get specific. At a very minimum, it's imperative to document decisions and action items. You want to be exquisitely clear with these. Now, if you are one of the countless people who's written or called to ask me how to improve accountability on your teams, listen up. This is it. When you write a decision, it needs to be marked. For example, decision. The next workshop will be at a retreat near Portland. Okay? Super clear. That's the decision. If the team needs to go back later and see what they decided, they can quickly scan for that big decision. And there it is. Now, writing out the decision also gives us a chance to ask questions before we start acting on it. A retreat. Well, what does that mean? Are we talking about a golf retreat or a monastic retreat? And what does near mean? That's an incredibly useful discussion to have that might get skipped if the boss says, we should have our next workshop at a retreat nearby, and everyone else says, oh yeah, that's a good idea, and then they move on without writing anything down. When we don't write out the decisions, it's likely that the boss thinks that was the decision, but everyone else thinks she was just talking. So nothing happens. So you need to write decisions. Next, action items document who will do what by when. These are the promises people are making to the group. So whether your group calls them tasks, to-dos, or whatever, the core requirements for a quality promise or action item are the same. First, a good action item is one that everyone in the room will be able to easily agree when it's done. You should all be able to say, yep, that's done, with confidence. Second, the action item should state who specifically is responsible for making sure it gets done. At Apple, they call this person the directly responsible individual, which doesn't mean that person has to do the work by themselves. It means they're responsible for seeing that the work is done and reporting back to the group. Third, the action item needs a due date. Otherwise, action items that are due someday will be prioritized and worked on someday. And no one's sure exactly when someday will come, but we know it's sure not today. So this, for example, is a lousy action item. Action item. We need to look into retreat locations for the workshop. Someday, assign to everyone. Well, what does look into mean? And when will we know that looking into is done? And what can the group expect to see as a result of all this looking into? Remember, we're after strong agreements that we can understand and trust. This action item is much better. Action item. Find at least 4 retreat locations and send links to the group before our next meeting. Next Tuesday, assigned to Sally and Jishwan. Do you see the difference? That first action item was so sloppy that the team was going to show up at the next meeting with maybe some ideas and maybe no progress at all. In their next meeting, they'd still be talking about the idea of a retreat, with the deadline getting closer. The second action item made it obvious what the group could expect by when, who was responsible, and it meant they'd come to the next meeting having already reviewed some options, ready to narrow in on a location. Okay, so those are the minimal requirements: decisions and action items. What else should you include? Well, the specific kinds of notes you'll need will depend on the purpose and desired outcomes for the meeting. Generally, you want to capture key points, important news, and other headlines. What does that leave out? Skip the back and forth. These notes are not transcripts. Never once in our goals did I say it's important to have a record of who said what. That's not the point. In fact, if you're doing it right, you may write down that decision and then rewrite it a few times as the group talks about it some more. That written decision is what the group creates together. That's your result. That's why you met. So it's important not to muddy it up by writing down all this back and forth discussion. Keep it simple. If you also want a transcript, fine. Record the conversation. But remember, that's a different kind of documentation. Also, omit the irrelevant. We tell a lot of stories in our meetings, but we don't take many notes about those because they aren't useful later. You should leave out extra detail that will make the notes harder to scan. You also want to discard anything you wouldn't want posted on social media. Before starting Lucid Meetings, I worked at an e-discovery firm, one of many companies that create software used by lawyers to find evidence on people's computers. And we practiced by reviewing the personal email for Enron employees, because all their computers were seized as evidence when Enron collapsed. We saw evidence for the scandal, and also every one of them who was having an affair with a coworker or cheating on their fantasy football league and bad-mouthing customers. That experience made 2 things obvious. First, evil, illegal practices are a stupid way to do business. Just don't do that. And second, if you want to make sure something is never shared with the public, never put it on a computer. But I'm sure that last warning doesn't apply to you anyway, so no worries. Okay, let's sum that one up. First, visible notes are notes that everyone can see in the meeting as they're created in real time. The goals of visible note-taking are to create strong agreements, clear up misunderstandings, show progress, and create joint ownership for the results. Visible notes must include any decisions made and any action items. Visible notes should also include key points or headlines that make it easy for someone to see what the group accomplished when they review the notes later. Visible notes should not include who said what, lots of detail, off-topic or irrelevant discussions, nor anything you'd be sad to see on social media. In the next video, I'll go over the 4 ways groups create visible notes so you can put all this to work.